Okay, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here. We realize that it is homecoming week and vice presidential debates, and there are many things going on tonight, so we appreciate you coming and sharing your time here at the Faces of Advocacy with Action Utah. My name is Patti Cook. I am the Advocacy Educator at Action Utah, and let's go through the overview of what's going to happen tonight. So first of all, I'm going to talk about who Action Utah is, how we express in the work that we do, also 3 steps to getting involved in your local community or however advocacy expresses for you. We're going to have some opening comments by Community Advocate Courtney Kendrick. We're going to have a moderated panel with Krisanne, Michelle, and Sydney, then any questions, and then closing comments by Executive Director Andrea Himoff. So a little bit about Action Utah and the history. In 2016, 2 working moms got together and decided that something needed to happen, that it was time for them to jump into advocacy work. Andrea was a screenwriter and a filmmaker, and Katie Lieberman is a licensed clinical therapist. And so I love the fact that neither of them were steeped in politics when they started this. They were just 2 working moms who decided something needed to happen. So Action Utah, our tagline is Your Voice in Action. We're a nonpartisan community advocacy organization empowering Utahns to get civically involved. We work on the majority of issues that Utahns care about based on polling data. Those usually fall in these areas: public health, families and communities, environmental stewardship, and government. We do that through education, like what we're doing now. We have tools and resources, and we also have policy work that we work on. Some of the ways that we do that, our why and how, is we are passionate in helping Utahns not only understand themselves, what they care about, but also the issues that are happening in the community and in the state. We do that through things like living room conversations. If you have 15 of your friends and you have an issue you want to talk about, we will come into your home and we will talk to you about that issue. We'll tell you what we know about it, what's happening in the legislative session on it, and get conversations going around that. We do Advocacy Boot Camp, which is a 5-week session to kind of get you in deep of what advocacy work is, what you care about, how to talk to it, where it fits in the scheme of things, and then going away with an actual plan of what that advocacy could look like. We believe in youth leadership. We have interns and fellows that come to us from BYU, from the University of Utah, from other organizations. And we also work on policy recommendations. We work with legislators and other people and recommend policy to them based on those areas that we just talked about. One thing that Action Utah does that I really believe in is they do civil discourse, they do dialogue, they do bridge building. I became part of it when I heard Andrea speak the first time, and I really liked the way she spoke about things. She spoke about different perspectives are needed and her measured approach and always reaching across the aisle and deciding what everyone can bring to the table. I think that's a great thing and much needed in our conversations today. So to sum it up in a nutshell, what we really think is no matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world. What you say and do does matter. Okay, so let's talk about 3 ideas to get involved. There are some people here who are very involved, and maybe there are some people who are just starting out or who are watching who are just starting out. So let's get down to basics here. First one is to get curious. The second is get informed, and the third is to take action. So we're going to have some, if you're sitting by yourself, if you want to move up here by someone, we're going to have a little bit of participation and interaction as we go through this. So first is get curious. Notice what keeps coming up for you as you are on social media, as you're reading the news, as you're talking to people. What keeps getting triggered in you, or what are you curious about? The thing for me is I moved my family of 5 downtown Salt Lake and into an apartment. And I didn't realize that Salt Lake has a no idling ordinance. They have an idling ordinance. So I would take my kids to school, they're in elementary school, and they have all of these signs up, no idling, no idling. And it had never been a problem, like I'd never even thought about it until I had all these no idlings. So then that made me curious. Well, how often did I idle? Where did I idle? I have a daughter in competition dance. I idle a lot. I pick my kids up from school. That's idling a lot. I've got competition soccer and a baby in a car seat. I idled a lot in the winter when I'm waiting, right? I started to get curious and notice all these places where it was coming up for me. And I had never even cared about idling before I got curious about it. So I started to think about the facts and statistics about idling. I started to look into it. I realized that it can take years off the life of aged parents, which I also have. It can cause respiratory problems in children and toddlers, which I also have. So then the facts and statistics started, making my curiosity be like something I need to look into. I started deciding what my story was about it. I care about this because it's impacting the life of my family, right? My kids go to school, and Salt Lake also has a rule that when it's red and orange air quality days, that the kids can't go to recess. So then they started coming home and saying, I didn't go to recess today, and I started noticing how many red and orange days there were and how it was affecting my life, right? Because they come home with their crazy energy that they didn't get out at school into my tiny apartment, and I was like, wow, this really matters. My idling and my friends idling that I'm starting to talk to now matters. So get curious, decide some facts and statistics around an issue that come up for you. Decide what your story is and decide what you're going to do about it. For me, it was a lifestyle decision. I stopped idling. I noticed where I was idling. And then I got it down to 10 words or less, right? My name is Patti. I care about air quality because it impacts my family's health and happiness, right? It can be as simple as that. So I want you to try it, okay? I want you to say an issue that has come up or that you're curious about and introduce yourself to your neighbor and say, my name is Patti and I'm interested in air quality because, or I'm interested in the gender wage gap, or I'm interested in immigration, or I'm interested in transportation, or whatever it is. And just try on how that is to introduce an issue that you care about. So I'm going to give you maybe 1 or 2 minutes and partner up with someone, and let's try that. You say it, and then also let your partner say it.
I'll sit with you, Michelle. My name is Andre. I care about climate change. I fear that it impacts the safety, the health, and the economy of everybody on this planet. My name is Michelle, and I care about civic involvement in the city of Minnesota so that people can know how local laws affect their families and taxes. Yes, every day. People forget that so much. Teachers who've been trained in each university's state level. So it's helping provide some incentive scholarship ability to develop. I like it. It's great. Yeah, others too. Yeah, that's kind of very frustrating area. We don't want to put any money.
All right, thank your partners and wrap it up.
We should give it, it should be paid.
So did anybody die? Nobody died. Sometimes we feel like when we express our opinions, especially now, that maybe we'll die, or maybe someone will yell at us, or but none of that happened. Does anyone want to shout out what their issue was, or what someone? That sounds bad. What your issue is? What you're curious about? Andrea?
Sure. I'm not shy. I said that my issue is climate change because I fear that it impacts the safety and the health and the economy of basically every person on this planet. That's my biggest issue.
Okay. Look how succinctly she just said that. Anyone else want to say? All right. So So now, once you know what you kind of know what you're going to get curious about, what keeps coming up for you, what you're drawn to, you need to know where you want to have an impact. For me, with my idling, I decided it was a lifestyle choice. But also, I moved into a new city now, and I could go on the local level to my community council and say, hey, in the last city I lived in, they had a no idling ordinance. I think we should really implement that here. What steps would I need to take to implement that? Or I could go to the state level and I could call up my legislators and I could email them and I could say, hey, this is affecting my aging parents. This is affecting my children. I'm really interested in you being involved in this and helping me pass this legislation. Or you can go take it all the way to the federal level, right? Or I could also volunteer on boards and commissions or departments that perhaps work with air quality or different things like that. So I kind of liken it to when you move into a new place, you know about the pizza guy, right? You got to figure out the pizza guy and who orders the pizza and where it's at and who has the best pizza and who can come to your house, who can find it. It's the same with your issue. You've got to figure out where it lands and what kind of impact you want it to have. They are all good. None of them are wrong, right? If I just do a lifestyle choice or if I do local or state, they're all good because we're all getting engaged. It's just where you want to have an impact. Okay, so as you're getting curious and as you're gathering information, one thing that is really helpful is just open up a Google Doc. Term it idling or whatever it is for you and just gather information on it. Gather statistics, gather stories, gather whatever it is, and just have your Google Doc. Then, when you're ready to talk to someone, when I'm ready to go to the community council, when I'm ready to talk to my legislator, I make it look pretty, I put my name on it with my address and my phone number. We call it, the advocacy tool is called a one-page. Then you have something to leave with them that they can remember when they're like, oh, what did she talk about? Oh, right, she was the girl who talked about the idling. And then they have my address, and I can also call back and say, hey, remember, I'm the one that gave you that one sheet on idling. I'd like to talk about it further, or what have you done on that? So on whatever your issue is, you can do that. And that especially helps on the local level and on the state level with legislators as you're calling them out and talking to them. So get your Google Docs open or your notes on your phone or take pictures or whatever it is to gather your information. But that's super helpful. Okay, so now you're curious. Now you need to get informed, right? We've all said the wrong thing, we've all given the wrong statistic, and that's totally fine. We're all just trying to get informed. So what you can do is you can find allies, right? Who's talking about what you care about? You can go to Action Utah, or whoever is interested in what you're doing. Google them, talk to other people, find out who your allies might be. le.utah.gov has anyone been on that? Anyone know that website? Yeah? Okay. This is a great, I used to hate this website, but I've come to love it. It is not intuitive. I wish someone would revamp it, but it is the place that you can go and learn who your legislators are. You can talk to them there. Every month before the legislative session in January, you can get on your interim, which is once a month. All the committees will meet about whatever they're going to talk about in the legislative session. And you can put your earbud in and you can listen online, or you can actually come up to the Capitol and listen. So I went on last night, I clicked on all the agendas of the different committees like Education and Justice and Economic Development and all the social services to see what issues I cared about, so I knew which committee meetings to show up into. And sometimes I don't care about it, but I get curious and I'm like, what are they talking about there? And I've sat in meetings where I'm like, I had no idea. So it's a great way to get informed, okay? And you can go back and listen. So maybe you can't do it tomorrow, but you can go back and listen to it next time. It's also a great way to get to know the personalities of the legislators. Who's nice? Who talks? Who cuts you off? Who for real, you can get a feel for who they are and how they interact. So that's a great resource. And then vote utah.gov if you want to make sure you're registered to vote. All those kind of things can happen there. So those are some good resources. This is what Actions page looks like. If you want to, we've got a voter handbook, we've got fact-checking tools, tips for contacting your representatives, how to run for state office. If you want to get informed, there is a multitude of information out there. We do calls to action, as well as other nonprofits do. Calls to action that if you're not sure what actions to take, we will help you. Okay, we'll send it into your inbox and be like, maybe you want to think about this, or maybe you need to make a public comment on this. Okay, as you're getting educated, I want you to consider these two messaging. Emily Dickinson said, tell the truth but tell it slant. So you need to know what the slant is on whoever you're joining or whatever messaging you have. We call it bridge building versus barnstorming. Does anybody know what that is? Okay, I know you know what it is. Bridge building is civil, it's conversations, it's relationship building, it takes some time. Barnstorming is protest, sit-ins, things that grab public awareness, which are super important. Both of these are tools in your advocacy box. Both of these are important because sometimes if you're building bridges and you're doing civil dialogue, maybe it's not getting the attention it needs and you need a barnstorming partner to say, hey, let's do a march on this. Like, let's get some public awareness to this. But the thing about barnstorming is it gets public awareness, but all those people that went to the march, are they gonna go vote? Do they know who their legislators are? So both of them are good tools in your advocacy work. You don't have to be one or the other. I'm definitely more bridge building, but I definitely have some barnstorming in me. Does anybody want to take a guess at what they are? Tell us what you are. Are you a barnstormer?
Barnstormer.
Barnstormer, she knows, she claims it, I love it. Bridge builders are like, no, that's not me, kind of like me, I don't know. Anybody else know what they are, want to claim it?
Bridge builder.
Bridge builder for sure. Yeah. And if you're a bridge builder, it's good to have some barnstorming friends. And if you're a barnstormer, it's good to have some bridge building friends, right? Who can maybe do some things that you might not be able to do. So, does that make sense for everybody? Okay. And then last, take action. Contact elected officials, march, testify, attend public meetings. Build houses for Habitat for Humanity. Vote in elections. Take a friend with you to vote in the elections. Run for office. Become a neighborhood delegate. Volunteer your time in any organization. Many people think of advocacy this way, right? Running for office, coming up to the Capitol, lobbying. But what we also want you to think about is it's this way. It's your recycling can. It's gathering your people together and talking to them. It's voting, it's volunteering and building up your communities. It's sending a letter to a legislator or a friend or an email saying, hey, did you read this? What do you think about this? It's getting active on your PTA boards, you know? So we believe informed and responsive democracy requires that a wide range of voices and interests be heard in order to build positive, productive communities and shape and implement public policy in those communities, in the state, and in the nation. So the truth is that being civically engaged has no one mold. Often we talk to people who come up to intern or who engage with us who say, I have to be this way, or I have to say it this way, or I have to look like this, or I have to be a professional lobbyist. Well, that just simply is not true. There is place for all of those things, but all of us have something that we can do and are doing. We need people to participate in all these types of engagements at any level that works for them. The point is to take some kind of action. And if you don't like the action you took, we'll experiment and take another kind of action. And that's how we got to this series, The Faces of Advocacy. I hope that as people talk today, as we have a barnstormer and we have a bridge builder and we have some people in between, maybe people you don't think would probably be like, you know, professional lobbyists or whatever, that you can see yourself in these spaces of advocacy, in the way that they do things, or be like, curious about that. How might I go home and do something about it? So, we want to introduce Courtney right now and have her say a few things, and then Andrea will introduce her panelists and we'll go from there. So Courtney is a writer, a blogger, a columnist, a speaker, and a community advocate. For 12 years, she has cultivated her award-winning blog, cjanekendrick.com, where she writes personal essays on a wide range of topics. As a lifetime resident of Provo, Utah, she co-founded, produced, and hosted Downtown Provo's rooftop concert series, as well as the annual celebration of Provo Women's Day. She's a former columnist for the Desert News and has recently been featured on New York Magazine's The Cut and Scott Simon's Weekend Edition on NPR. After 3 years as a civic outreach advisor for the Provo City Mayor's Office, Courtney left to pursue campaign strategy and communications consultancy. I love that she pivots. She lives in Provo's Tree Street community with her husband Christopher and 4 children. Courtney.
I am so honored to be able to do this with you guys tonight and with Action Utah. I have seen this amazing wave of community advocacy swell, and I've seen dear people in my life do amazing things because of Action Utah. So thank you for having me. I'm really honored. I feel like I need to just say this out loud. I am not a sentimental person by nature at all. In fact, my husband, who is a professional corporate trainer, likes to shock and awe his audiences by revealing that he is married to a woman for whom sentimentality ranks so low on her registered emotions that cardiologists have a hard time actually believing that there's a beating heart in there. For comparison's sake, sentimentality is the top 3 motivator in my husband's life. So you can see that we have some issues. But as fascinating as dissecting modern relationships can be, I realize that we're not all here to talk about my marriage. But perhaps you can say that you can feel that when I say that I feel a little bit tender about being in this space right here tonight talking about advocacy, it means a lot to me. I haven't actually been able to run through my remarks without these like blobs of water welling up around my eyes that don't happen often. But because my personal advocacy work is done by words mostly, allow me to explain why I'm feeling this way tonight. In 2015, I worked in the Provo City's mayor's office as a community engagement specialist. My job was to help the mayor interact with intersections of the population that you wouldn't necessarily see showing up to a city council meeting. And by the way, we had a name for the people that you always see showing up to the city council meetings, and that was the 10. Meaning the 10 people, the same 10 people that you always see. God bless the 10, we'd say, for they are supreme advocates. And every single town from here to Laverkin, that's a town, right? I actually didn't know that. Has their very own 10 who show up for land permit discussions or sewage easement changes or debates about public water fountains. Whatever was on the table, they were there for it. But it was my job to engage outside of the 10. It became obvious to me that here in Provo, we had a lack of female insight and voices in our public engagement. Today, we have our first mayor here in Provo, which is great, but she works with an all-male city council and mostly an all-male board of directors. So I came up with this idea to locally celebrate the global recognition of Women's Day on March 8th. We called it Provo Women's Day and planned a packed celebration to inform and engage women throughout our city. The first event we planned was called the Breakfast with the Mayor in the City Council chambers. Because another one of my jobs at the mayor's office was a speechwriter, I started to put together a rough draft speech of what he would deliver at the breakfast. I decided it would be interesting to put together a compilation of profiles of women's advocates in Provo. Only I couldn't find much. And since I'm not a historian, I checked in with our city historian and asked him, and he didn't generate much either. So I was kind of at a loss, which is tragic when I think about it. But then through more research, I remembered Shirley Paxman. Shirley Paxman was a longtime president of Provo. I knew her as a child because she was the lady that ran my favorite museum of all time, the McCurdy Dollhouse Museum, where we could go and see thousands of dolls in an old historic home in downtown Provo. Now deceased, Shirley stood out for her tireless work of community organizing. She felt very strongly that the children in Provo needed to get outside of their bubbles and see more than our homogenous community. The Daily Herald wrote this about Shirley. She was unconventional and ready to speak out, a strong, enthusiastic feminist, a mentor, and an advocate for the underprivileged. And I just want to add that she was the bravest of all because she was a Democrat in Provo. I could spend my entire time up here listing all the things that Shirley did for Provo, for women, for education, for our hospital, for history, for art community, and so on. And it is worth mentioning that as a Latter-day Saint, Shirley had a soft spot for Provo's non-Mormon churches and was a regular visitor and patron of many of them. But tonight, I want to mention one historic moment of her life that is quite relevant. Those of us who were raised here in Provo know that this library was once Provo's greatest eyesore and public headache. We have some people that agree with us. Originally built as Brigham Young Academy, it was left vacant when BYU decided to build the rest of its campus up on the hill where it is now. The entire square, which originally had several buildings, fell into utter ruin, with owners changing hands and passing on the responsibility to the next unlucky bidder. In fact, I remember growing up that the scariest thing I could ever do in my life was spend a night at Academy Square among the shards of glass and the cobwebs and the community of not-so-friendly ghosts, maybe zombies. I wasn't really sure, but I knew something lived in the shadows. Members of our community began to organize to talk about this monumental problem. In Shirley's words, "We grieved about it being sold. I wrote lots of letters, and then when the lawn and the trees were dying, my husband Monroe repaired the sprinkling system, and we paid the water bill. For 25 years, I've worked with every mayor and every developer." Finally, in 1994, Provo City bought Academy Square. I quote from BYU Magazine. "Within weeks of the purchase, believing that the square's dilapidation and liability now superseded its historic easement, the city announced that Georgetown Development was preparing to replace the building with condos." So now we're in like a Meg Ryan movie, right? But Academy Square supporters like Shirley did not give up. Lawsuits ensued, funds were raised, public information went out to gather more support. However, deadlines passed and the city code couldn't stretch anymore. Academy Square was a public hazard and therefore a liability. On the very moment the bulldozers showed up to begin demolishing the entire square, Shirley, having faith that help was on its way, that would ultimately save the project, ran to the square and put her body between this structure and the bulldozers. Her husband has remarked that from that point on, she was known as the little old lady that saved Academy Square. So this action is why we're here tonight, not only because we're talking about advocacy, but because literally we would not be in this room without Shirley's courage to use her body to advocate for the preservation of Provo history. This story to me is a story about how important using your body is in advocacy work. I don't mean to suggest anything as drastic as positioning yourself in front of an intimidating wrecking crew with massive horsepower, though that is pretty amazing. I mean coming to awareness that sometimes our bodies are as important as our mouths when it comes to doing this work. Bodies make or break a peace demonstration, a policy protest, an awareness action, a city council agenda. Remember, it only takes 10 bodies to get a lot done. For example, when we first started the rooftop concert series 10 years ago as an effort to revitalize our downtown, we needed bodies more than we needed anything. We had a volunteer crew, we had some starter funds, we even had the support of the Provo PD. In the end, it was the people showing up, the energy of the dancing crowds, the masses who appeared in the photographs that helped resuscitate the heart of our downtown. My Aunt Chris Pope, who died a few years ago, was another staunch defender and Democrat of Provo. She told her kids, "We are the Pope family and the Popes show up." I have since adapted that policy in our house. When it comes to making our community better, the Kendricks show up. This is a fairly accessible, low expectation, much appreciated form of advocacy work, and it costs nearly nothing. It goes a long way. I think about this every time a call of support goes out for local demonstrations. I am an introvert who experiences doses of social anxiety like many of us do. My heart's beating super fast right now for a second. But I remind myself that my body in that space has value alone. I don't have to show up with a sign or a pithy caption or a well-designed lettering. I don't need a cute statement shirt or a pink knitted hat or a collection of social justice friends I met online. I don't need a megaphone, though I do have one just in case. I just need to show up at the right time. I surely did. I would like to mention that my own mother, Cynthia Clark, who also worked tirelessly to get this library built. I would like to mention that my own mother, Cynthia Clark, worked tirelessly to get this library built as she sat on the project board. I remember her coming home with architecture blueprints and line item budgets. She was an important engine that pushed Provo voters to vote for a bond that would partially fund the reconstruction. I have a newspaper dated February 17th, 1997 with a front page photograph of me and my college friends that my mother recruited, standing in front of the old square staging a honk and wave. Has anyone ever done a honk and wave? Good times. Reminding people to vote for the bond in the special election. I will never forget the next day when the votes were counted and the bond was passed by 58% of the vote. Someone made a huge banner that read, "Thank you, Provo, for saving me." I put it on the chain link fence just outside this building and University Avenue. And I will never forget watching my mother the day of the dedication at the podium with this beautiful red roof miracle behind her speaking about public advocacy. Even to this day, when we come to the library, which is weekly, my kids race to see who can touch the engraved names of my parents on the memorial contributions plaque. Years later, my mom ran for Provo City Council and won. She ran on neighborhood preservation and gained a reputation for being unwilling to bend when it comes to keeping developers out of Provo's most cherished spaces. In working with her, then Mayor Lewis Billings, exasperated and fed up, publicly called my mother out for being strident. And I do want to add that my dad was far more strident, but he got called a leader instead. My mother didn't let the personal get to her, and she kept a sense of humor about it. Afterward, her colleagues posted a sign outside of her city council office that read, "Cindy the Strident." Now I use it as a name of heritage. My mom is Cindy the Strident. My mom is the first great mother of stridents, preserver of neighborhoods. I am Courtney, daughter of the first great strident, user of characters, mostly on the land of Twitter. And someday I will give my kids their names and bless them and send them on their strident way. The last point I want to make about advocacy work is this. I have learned to look for joy in the labor. The joy meaning the people that you meet that change your perspective, the comical drama that awaits you when you show up to a heated public meeting, the late nights of delirium organizing with like-minded soldiers. We once organized a public advocacy meeting with community partners for refugees in Utah County. The meeting was held at a local LDS church gym, and so many people showed up that we were flirting with fire code standards. Were you there, Becca? It was unexpected chaos, and we were sweating. And then to our surprise, food trucks showed up and started selling tacos. And in that moment, there was nothing more funny to us or more delicious. I do have to be judicial in deciding when to lead and when to follow. I never want to get to a place where I resent my community work. It's easy to fuse your own identity with the project at hand and lose perspective. I've done that so many times, mostly on Facebook, yelling with all caps, up to my eyebrows with shame, doing more damage to to the cause than helping. Let's say I'm a barnstormer, a brainy barnstormer.
Yeah.
And there have been times when I've had to resign or bow out of projects because I couldn't maintain the sense of joy I needed. And I use the word joy because to me it's a word that encompasses a journey with a totality of emotions that result in a net positive. I suppose advocacy work is the reason why I'm not a huge sentimentalist. You have to learn to fortify your fragile heart for the days when the work devastates. Like when you lose a key supporter, or when your funding dries up, or when you realize how much work is to be done in the way of equaling the scales of humanity. It's no wonder our greatest advocates come across as the most honoring among us. But all that matters is that the work gets done. And that reminds me of our hero, Shirley, who lived by the words of Gibran, the ultimate motto of the tireless advocate: work is love made visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. I just loved that. Me, the bridge builder. So inspiring. And I think that that's why I'm looking forward to this panel so much, is because everybody's stories are really different. And everybody can advocate in their own way that is so personal to them, and on the causes that matter to them, and they don't have to follow anybody else's path, or they can. And so I'm really looking forward to bringing this panel up, and actually I invite all the panelists to join me here at the front so I can introduce you, and we can hear from them different ways that people are making a difference in communities, in different places. Let me start with Sydney, since she's coming next to me. Sydney Ward is the founder of Project 320, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing and empowering youth civic engagement in Utah County. She's very involved in the policy debate and national youth activist networks. Currently a senior at Salem Hills High School, Sydney enjoys keeping up with the news and Netflix. Her favorite pastime is asking everyone she meets if they're registered to vote. Krisanne, who I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, so hello. Krisanne Knudsen is, did I pronounce that correct? Knudsen is an art educator, writer, and mama of 3. She spends her days making glitter potions with her 4-year-old, researching nonprofits, and catching up on her ever-expanding reading list. She recently launched the Of One Heart Book Club, which uses books, conversations, and service projects to center the needs and experiences of immigrant communities. She shares her book club journey on her Instagram account at Of One Heart Book Club. And finally, Michelle McCullough is the author of 4 books, the owner of 3 businesses, the mother of 2 kids, and the wife of just 1. Michelle is a professional motivational speaker and has regular segments on KSL and Fox 13 TV. She is a sought-after speaker and trainer, teaching business and success principles to corporations and associations. She loves Dr. Pepper, Disneyland, and being happy. I'd like to also welcome Patti to come and lead this panel in an interesting discussion about what advocacy looks like to you. Thanks.
Love it. Makes me so excited. Thank you for your story. And thank you, ladies. Like, I've known most of these people for a long time. And when I thought of this idea of Faces of Advocacy, these women popped into my mind. I've watched them as they've grown and changed and pivot and undertaken things that were important to them, and I really appreciate them showing up today. So let's start with get curious. Okay, so Sydney, let's start with you, and we'll go down the row of what made you curious enough to start participating in what you're participating in. So tell us what you're participating in, and then kind of what started the catalyst of it.
Okay. So I do a lot of work surrounding student voice in education policy and in the legislative session in general. And a lot of it started when my mom started dragging me to caucus meetings in junior high. It wasn't super fun at first, but once I realized that there were people there that were representing me and that I could talk to, and they would most of the time listen to what I had to say. That really sparked my interest in like speaking up and continuing to get involved. And so I've become really interested in education funding and equity throughout the state, and I think the first time that I really like noticed my legislators noticing me and respecting my opinions was when I emailed them a year and a half ago about a bill in the legislative session. I just said, hey, I'd really love it if you would support this. It means a lot to me. And immediately I got emails back like 4:30 in the morning. It was kind of crazy. They were up really early with the legislative session. But and it was just incredible to me to see that they respected me and wanted to pay attention to what I had to say.
Awesome, thank you. Krisanne.
Oh, it all started with Donald Trump. Last summer, when the Trump administration implemented the zero tolerance policy, where they were systematically separating children and parents at the border, migrant children and parents at the border, I just had a very visceral response to that, as I'm sure a lot of people did, because it's such an inhumane thing to do. I remember as a little girl, I had really intense separation anxiety, and I remember my mom dropping me off for first grade and just feeling overwhelmed with that homesick feeling, like I know I'm going to see her in 6 hours, but it's not going to be, you know, I want to see her in half an hour. I don't want to wait 6 hours. And I just remember that overwhelming feeling of homesickness just going to first grade. And so I was immediately transported back to that child. When I started reading about these children being separated from their parents, I was back in that space of being 6 years old and watching my mom drive away. And it was just overwhelming. And so my first reaction was just barn burner on Facebook. Courtney, all the caps, all the anger. Deleting and then reposting and then deleting again and then reposting. And I thought, okay, this may be not the best approach if I want to actually be effective in changing something. And so it took a while, but over time, I started sharing some of my thoughts in more of a bridge builder way on my Instagram account, and I got enough response and feedback just from that I thought, you know, people want to know what's going on at the border, and people feel the pain of this story, but they don't know what's true. They're reading all of these different things in different news outlets, and there's all of this talk about fake news, and no one really knows what's going on. And so what I decided to do was organize an event in my home where I invited one of my friends who was an immigration lawyer and who had worked in one of these detention centers, I want to say like at least a decade. So she had a lot of experience. She was working in the detention centers under the Obama administration and then partly for the Trump administration. And she had a lot of great insight. So she came and I gathered community members. I just put it out there, and friends and family and neighbors came. And she talked about just the nuts and bolts of immigration, what's true, what's myth, what we hear about that's half true, but here's the nuanced version of it so you can understand a little bit better. And then afterwards, we put together hygiene kits for Lifting Hands International, which takes those to the border. And we wrote notes in Spanish for an organization called Detainee Allies, where they send letters and care packages and things to people who are in the Otay Mesa Detention Center in California. And I was so empowered by that experience, and I was so filled, I was so moved by people's questions and their humanity, and I felt so much energy. And so I thought, well, let's do something more. Let's make this more consistent. So that's when I started the Of One Heart Book Club, which the idea being is that when we are of one heart, we can change the world. And so I want to bring people together from my community. Again, same sorts of people, my neighbors, my friends. And we don't all have to have the same viewpoint on the issue of immigration, but let's get together and read books written by immigrants and talk about their experiences and learn more and hear their voices and center their voices in our experiences. And then let's, with that conversation we have at the book club, let's take that energy and that knowledge and then do something together to serve that community. So to give you an example, we had our first book club last week, and we read Enrique's Journey, which is a true story about a young boy from Honduras who traveled all the way up through Central America, through Mexico to get to his mom who's living in America. So we read that story, we talk about these issues, and then we put together hygiene kits again for Lifting Hands International. And next month we're reading how the Garcia girls lost their accents, and we're making sanitary feminine hygiene products for young women. So it's local, it's not federal, it's not Facebook barnstorming, it's intimate, and I feel like intimacy and vulnerability and sharing spaces where we can be honest and explore tough issues together. To me, that is the way that hearts are changed, and movement can be really, really powerful in a healthy direction.
Thank you.
Mine started when I was a junior in high school, and I attended ALA Utah Girls State, which I heard you mention and is a big heart of mine. And from that experience, I gained two things that I didn't have before. A strong understanding that my vote mattered, even and especially in civic and city and state government issues. And I also left with a deeper sense of patriotism, but stemmed from the brave men and women who sacrificed their lives to defend our country. And so from that experience, I actually ran for governor, which is the highest position that they have. I had never won a student council position in my entire life, and I ran every year from the time I was in 4th grade to the time I was a junior.
That's perseverance.
So it's interesting because I tell that part of the story because that experience was magical for me to learn about becoming who I really wanted to be and sharing who I really am, where I don't think I ever shared that before. And I almost didn't run at the last minute, but because I did and I had that great experience, I came back the next year as the returning official, and I got to see other pieces of it, and I started to see how I knew my life was changed, but lots of people's lives were changing. And so I knew I needed to be involved. And so I've been on staff for Utah Girls State every year, almost every year. I missed 2 years when I had babies. And so now it's so fun for me to watch. While I am not always I am always a voter, and I have voted every year since, and I will tell people and send people links and say you need to vote, and I'll take friends with me, and they think I'm a little bit annoying, and I'm fine with that. But my favorite thing now is just watching girls who 3, 4, 5, 10 years later who run for office in city communities, who are just simply delegates in their communities and understand how important that is. But we've had girls who have gone into the military and who are wonderful rock star stay-at-home moms who are advocates. And so I love watching the ripple effects of this program and have found that to be one of my favorite ways to be involved and to hopefully encourage other people to grow in their love of those two things as well.
I love it. I love that you all told personal stories, right? From your mom taking you to caucus meetings, your experience with your mom, and then your experience of finding out who you are and wanting to give that to other people. So I want you to, Krisanne, talk to us a little bit about the evolution, because you said a few evolutions of your story there, right? Donald Trump, and then you started with the immigration and your home. Talk to us about how those evolved, and how did you know the next step? Did you have someone like the lady that came out with the bulldozer, someone leading you to know how to do that, or how did you come up with those things?
That's a great question. So I'll start off by saying that I have a very political father, but he's the kind of person that likes to get really riled up about things, but then not really do much about it. So I treasure our political conversations because he helps me see things in ways that I'd never seen them before. And I also treasure that he's not the kind of advocate that I want to be, that if we're going to get riled up about these issues, then let's do something about them. So that's my personal heritage when it comes to advocacy work, is that I have a very fiery father, and I think that he instilled that in me. And then I want to take it to the next step as the next generation to do something more. And so I did start out fiery, and I still feel fiery, and I still catch myself getting in these really angry modes, but that's not where I want to be. And so I think, I'm not sure exactly what shifted. Maybe it was just probably, you know what I think it was? I think it was a couple of people who sent me some private messages on Instagram and said, some of us are your followers, are Trump supporters, and we want to hear what you have to say, but maybe you can be more of a bridge builder in saying what you have to say. And of course, like, my shackles went up immediately, like, right? But then thinking about it and taking some time and letting that percolate a little bit, there's truth to that, right? Like, it's important that if I'm trying to help people open their hearts and their minds to this issue, that I need to be a bridge builder in this particular context. So I think that softened my heart a little bit. So thank you, people who told me that. Critics. Thank you, critics.
Well, and congratulations for actually thinking about it, right? You could have said, no, I'm going to do what I'm doing, but.
Well, yeah, and I think, and that was part of it. And then when I hosted the immigration night, there were people there from all walks. I know that there were Trump supporters who were there, and I know that there were people who were anti-Trump and everything in between. And so it was nice to see that that was possible, to have all of these people coming together, learning together, and serving together, and they're all over the political spectrum. And then the third thing that kind of helped my evolution was my friend Michelle. So my friend Michelle is, she's Mexican-American, she's also an artist. And she paints a lot of images that have to do with her heritage, her Mexican heritage, her matriarchal line. And she came to this immigration night that I hosted and talked a little bit about her experience. She was a missionary on the border, so she had a lot of experience with immigrant communities and particularly undocumented immigrants. So she came and shared her experience as a missionary there, and also just being Mexican American and her own experiences. And after that immigration night, she came to my house, and it was right after that man had shot all of those people in Walmart. Mm-hmm. And she just came and she was crying to me and just said, I live in this very white suburban community in Salt Lake, and I don't feel safe in my community. There are people who look like me, and there are people who look like my children who are being literally like slaughtered in our country, and there are people who don't want people who look like me to come into this country. And she was just bearing her heart, and that was the turning point for me. I thought, how can we make a community safer for people who look like Michelle? And I know not everybody who's Latino or Latina has these experiences, but this was Michelle's experience, and I wanted Michelle to feel safe, and I wanted Michelle to feel like her children were safe. And so that really was where the book club was born, because I thought if I could get all of my women friends to come and sit with me, and we can talk about these issues together, and at the very least they can be aware that there are people like Michelle who want to be here but who feel scared to be here. And so she was a very, I didn't mention this in the first question, but she was a very pivotal turning point for me in really taking my advocacy to the next level. It was very personal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I can feel the personal attachment you have to that and your care for people. Cindy, let's talk about you and your evolution. Like, so you went with your mom to the caucus meetings, and then you started doing things in your high school. Like, how did that start? How has that been? How have the students responded?
Yeah, so started out with the caucus meetings, and 2016 came around, and I was super interested in politics, but it was, divisive, and didn't quite know where to fit into that. So I spent the whole summer watching, the newscasters talk about politics, and that was just very toxic, and I wanted to do something that would actually give people a way to engage, and specifically young people, because I felt like they needed a voice in this too. This wasn't just something for the people who could vote. So I hosted a mock election my freshman year, and we had over 75% of the student body participate. And I was like, this is amazing. The conversations that started were incredible. We had people who were pretty politically outspoken, speaking up and talking, having these conversations. And we had people who had never talked about politics, and they come up to me after and say, this meant a lot to be able to share my opinion with my friends and have these conversations. And so that was really the biggest starting point for me, was that event. And then in the years that followed, I kind of tried to follow that event up, and I was post Parkland and the rise of March for Our Lives and things like that. There were a lot of other national organizations that came together surrounding student activism and young people getting involved, and I was able to get involved with a couple of those organizations, and they were able to give me the tools to organize with my legislators and getting them to talk with students at my high school, which was really incredible to see my friends speaking up for issues they believed in. Because I've always been, interested in education and mental health resources in schools, but being able to give my own friends that opportunity and seeing them now go on to vote for people that they care about and do their own research has been incredibly valuable. And just being able to give them that starting point has really been the end goal. And yeah, it all really started with 2016 and that one mock election.
I love it. I love that you've got energy off of that and that people are talking because of you. And Michelle, one thing that we talk about is when people know who they are, they're more apt to get engaged in politics, right? If they know what they're about. So you said you found that in Girls State. How have you found that in the girls that you participated with since?
Well, I think everyone's different,
Sure.
It just kind of depends, and you see the ones who are going to run for president one day, whether that's president of the PTA or president of the United States, it doesn't matter.
How do you know that? Like, what is that?
Well, you can see, my favorite thing in anything is watching someone change. And I love that look, when you see the look of someone saying, oh my gosh, I can do this, I can do that. And watching different people, just even watching someone go from, I can't give a speech to run for an office, to I can do that. And then that, I can give this speech means, oh, maybe I can run for something else. Mm-hmm. And just teaching these girls that they have a voice that matters, and providing them that safe environment first gives them lots of opportunities. And we've kind of pushed it over a little bit further to ensure that we do the pre-voting now. So if they're up to a certain age, they can do the registering to vote. And so we have them do that so that they are already in the system and they get prepared and they don't have to figure out how to do that later, because some people will call us and say, I don't know how to do that. So we kind of educate from the incubator stage to the real life stage and helping them make their own personal evolutions for what that is. And I don't think that everyone from that experience has to run for office. I certainly haven't, and I appreciate the people who do that, and that's not my jam at this point in my life. I give about 600 hours a year to Girls State, and that's volunteer, and it's hard, and that's great for me with all the other things that are going on. But I think that it really, if you can help someone think, how can you be involved in your community in even a small way, if you don't have 600 hours, if you have 6. And so there are so many different things that you'll be peaked in. And I think for me, we each had an experience that made us peaked into something, and we each are given, I believe, we're each given opportunities for advocacy peaking and for us to have different things that we care about. And I praise every day for the PTA moms, because I'm not a PTA mom, but I know how important that is, and I appreciate those PTA moms so, so much. And I appreciate the experiences that they had to be passionate about that. And if we all were experienced in PTA and no one cared about the immigrants, then we would have problems, right? And so it's not that any one issue is more important than another, but what is that thing that lights you up? And whether you have 5 minutes or you have 50, what can you do to make that work?
Yes, absolutely, right? There's no one mold. It's just acting on what you're feeling. So I love that you all said positive successes. Let's talk about when real life hits, or when resistance hits, or 600 hours in a year, right? You talked about that too, Courtney, when real life hits and you're it didn't go well, or they didn't like what I said, or no one showed up to the election, or any of that. What are some resistances that you felt, and how have you dealt with them? Sydney, let's start with you.
Okay. So it's all fun to stand up here, because I love advocacy and I love politics and all of that stuff. But, I want my friends to be engaged, but sometimes they don't want to do that. It's scary, it's a whole other world that sometimes is just too intense to get involved in for a lot of people. And so getting people to show up to events like this, town halls with legislators, like roundtables, is super, super difficult because often they think, oh, I don't have a place in this discussion, they won't respect my opinions, or they just frankly don't care. And I would love to see every single one of my friends find their thing, find their niche in something that they really, really care about. And I believe that all of us do have that thing that we want to advocate for, that we want to get involved in. And so I've tried to find creative ways to get people to come to events and to get involved with this sort of thing. Extra credit works well. The promise of food works well. But yeah, pushing back on apathy among young people and adults, I think, as well, is a huge problem. Our voter turnout rates are higher than in other states, but we definitely have a lot of work to do. And I think that finding ways to target that and to push back against that is super important, and something that I think collaborative problem solving is necessary for. So.
Very true. Thank you. Krisanne.
As you were talking, I was trying to think because I feel like I'm such a baby on this journey of advocacy, in terms of being new. And I think one of the major hurdles that I faced is that idea of imposter syndrome, like, who am I? First of all, I'm a white woman that lives in American Fork, Utah. Like, who am I to be the voice for immigrants? Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so there was a fear that I had, and my friend Corinne and I had long conversations about this, is that on the one hand, you have a lot of communities of color saying, it's not our job to educate you about racism, so you do your own homework. So I took that conversation. I said, yes, okay, I'm going to do my homework, and I'm going to get all these white ladies, and we're going to do our homework together. But then the other side is, who am I to speak about communities of color as a white woman in American Fork, Utah? So there was this tension, and it made me feel really nervous and really uncomfortable. And I thought, if I take this Of One Heart book club and make it public and make it into an Instagram account so everybody can see what I'm doing, am I going to come off as this totally naive person who thinks that she can save immigrants? I didn't want that to be the version of my advocacy. And so I'm so grateful for Corinne, because she talked me through it really well. She's a very smart woman.
It's good to have allies.
It's good to have allies. And she said, just be honest about your vulnerability and say, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I'm trying. Will you just take a step with me? We can hold each other's hands to feel safer and stronger, and we're gonna just do our best. And if I misstep, I will be open to criticism and ways of approaching things differently. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. And so I'm so grateful. Thank you for all those conversations. I'm so grateful for her because of that, because it is scary to be an advocate. It's scary to put yourself out there, especially when it's a controversial issue like immigration. And especially when it's controversial when you're dealing with communities of color specifically and racism specifically. And you're white. And so it is tenuous ground for sure. But I believe that when we're called, when we feel that spark, we have to answer, and we just answer in our vulnerability, and we answer honestly and say, I'm just doing the best I can, and I'm open to changes if needs be.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michelle?
I have so many. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that unless you've been there, it's really hard to explain the magic. And so
yes.
Even with my own home, my husband is like, you're a weird wacko and doesn't understand some of the things I do. So I think that some of my biggest challenges end in the choices, right? So some days having to choose that even though this cause is important to me, that I have to choose something else for a minute. And it's hard to put it on a shelf. And then other times when I have to choose the cause for a minute, aside whatever else is happening, because it needs to happen, and that's an important thing that's happening and the things to fight for. Our organization, the American Legion Auxiliary, has been around for almost 100 years, and the Girls State itself in Utah has been around since 1946. And there are some women who've been involved in the organization for many years who are not as interested in change as some of us younger folk. And so I also have to choose in those instances when to fight and when not to fight. And how to, and I'm always a huge fan of preserving the heritage of the association, but continuing to stay relevant, especially since the organization itself struggles with funding. And then we're trying to figure out how do we get money, and we've lobbied with the legislative, and they've donated some of their funds to help us. And trying to find sponsors and people who want to pay, because the more there are for young girls to do, the more choices they have to make about where to spend their time and where to spend their $400. So we get creative and offer college credit and try to do some other things. And so I think that the biggest challenges just lie in the choices of figuring out what to do. And to your point, sometimes I'll make a decision and I'll know that's wrong really fast, and then have to say, oh, I'm so sorry, or I didn't mean to offend, or how do we solve this problem without any money? And then you'd have to kind of backspace. But I think that the biggest challenge is moving again, that as soon as there's a challenge, as soon as there's a failure, as soon as there's a disagreement or a conversation that goes in a different direction, like still finding a way to move forward despite all of that.
I love that, because often, especially when we talk to people when they hit resistance, they'll stop because they're like, oh, they didn't call my legislator, they didn't listen to me, or I did something and no one showed up. So I love that of keep going through it. And I also think it's interesting, Sydney and Krisanne, you're doing it kind of on your own, you're working your way through it, and then also to be in an institution advocating, Michelle, there's also resistance too in both of those, pros and cons of doing it on your own or doing it through an institution. I don't have a time and the clock is wrong, so will someone tell me what time it is? Okay, perfect. We'll do one more question, then we'll wrap up. Okay. So what are you... Okay, let me ask you, do you claim the title of advocate? Would you say that you are an advocate?
Now.
Yes?
Now that I'm on a panel.
Yeah, right? It's like being a writer. What makes you an advocate? Sydney, yes?
Sure, yeah, I claim it.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say that they're all advocates? Courtney, do you claim that you're an advocate?
Yes.
Yes.
I
Okay.
have scars.
That's right. That's right. Like, that's the first step, right? Just claim it. And I love that you said that if you make a misstep or you say something wrong, you can change, you can pivot, you can do something different. So let's talk end goals. Let's talk your big visions as an advocate. They can either be for this course that you're on or like in general, what are the end goals here? Michelle, let's start with you on this one. You're a visionary. Let's see what you've got here.
Well, so I am currently on what they call the executive board of Girls State, and you commit to that for 10 years. And you move through 5 different positions. And so I'm on year 8, and so there is a director right before me, and then I'm the director for 2 years. I'm on year 6, so I've got 2 more years with her as the director, and then I'm the director for 2 years. And so it's interesting because we worked, the team right now does a really good job of working together, where in the past, the directors worked in silos, and it was hard to train new people coming up. So we all work together as a team, but I mean, we're kind of making decisions now that will affect me in 4 years, but then I also have to see beyond what the decisions I make now affect the program in 10 years. And then at the same time, like, part of my heart is already breaking that my term will come and go. and there's sometimes if you get invited back, sometimes you don't. I'm sure there are ways I'll still be involved, but I will never stop fighting for youth to have experiences that make them feel like they matter in civic government. And so whether that's participating on this level or just getting girls to go to Girls State or getting a group of girls together, I think that I was changed because it was given to me at a time when I could see my opportunities to actually be involved instead of when I was 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever. And so I still feel like my heart was with the youth in some way, shape, and form. And I'll always fight for the American Legion Auxiliary. I'm happy to be a member. I'm happy to serve veterans, and we continue to do that. And I think that I've also had to give myself permission to evolve as well as an advocate, right? And I get little issues that I get excited about, but I will never stop caring about youth, caring about civic involvement.
I love that. That's so definitive. I will never stop. And she's 4 years out, and she's already mourning that it's going to be over. That is an invested woman.
I know.
Sydney, how about you? What's your big vision?
So I haven't talked about this a lot, but I run an organization called Project 320, and we focus on getting youth more involved kind of in this immediate geographic area in local and state government. And I think that, short-term goals, I'm not going to be under, we cap it at 24 forever. That's how we define young people. So unfortunately, I want to see all of my legislators' inboxes filled with emails from young people on issues they care about. Longer term, I think I'm kind of similar to you. I don't ever want to stop doing this kind of work and this kind of engagement with young people and just people in general, teaching them that their voices do matter and that they have a place in the civic society, and we all have something to add to this, and we all should take up space in this place, even if it is just with our bodies or with the things that we want to share.
I love it. I had a friend tell me that when you rise, others rise with you, and I feel like that's exactly what you're saying about your friends, right? And Krisanne, what's the big picture for you, big vision?
Maybe one of the big visions for me, and the reason that I started the Instagram account for the Of One Heart Book Club, is that I want other women in their neighborhoods, in their communities, whether it's in American Fork, Utah, or Portland, Oregon, or somewhere in Florida, that they can follow along and say, I want to start something like this in my community, so that we have just little groups of women all over the country reading books about immigrant experiences written by immigrants, centering their voices, partnering with nonprofits in their communities, working to serve with these communities and serve these communities. And I just see, in my mind's eye, I just see these little beacons, all of these book groups all getting together and talking about these issues so that their hearts are changed. And then they go out and talk to their neighbor, who talks to their brother, who talks to their sister-in-law, who talks to their the person sitting next to them in the pew. And these conversations just create this ripple effect where hearts are changed, and people like Michelle start to feel safer in their communities, and they don't feel like they have to hide in their homes and not go to the grocery store and get milk for 3 days. It's just that continuing conversation with the reading and the serving.
I love that, and I love that you all four of you, want to take others. And that's exactly the point of Faces of Advocacy, right? All of our faces, as we get involved, we will affect other people that will ripple onto other people so that we can have thriving communities, a thriving state, and a thriving nation. So I just want to thank the panelists and Courtney from the bottom of my heart. So appreciative of that. And does anyone have any questions you want to ask them? All right, we'll turn some time over to Audrey to wrap it up. Thank you.
Once again, I'm so inspired by each of you. I want to be you when I grow up. And what I get from events like this all the time is that there are a million ways to get engaged. And that is so important for each of us to find our own best way. And that our own best way right now might be different from our own best way tomorrow. And that we can evolve, right? We can start where we are, and we can admit to our vulnerability and be really honest about that. When I started Action Utah, I had no policy or advocacy experience and came up with a business plan and ended up about 3 weeks later at my first ever state legislative session, and I had never set foot in the Capitol building before. I had no idea what I was doing. And I just went to legislators and said, hi, I'm new at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Do you want some help? Maybe we can help you. And they said, that's so lovely. I would love some help, you know. And I think, you know, even our elected officials feel that way and get to admit their vulnerability sometimes, you know. I'm just a freshman legislator. I don't know the rules yet, you know. And we hear that all the time. And so I think that barrier to entry is something that I hope we dispel through seeing what so many people do at so many young ages, and people who enter advocacy in retirement. I just love that there are all these different ways to do it, and that they can be very unique to each of us. People ask me all the time whether it's just incredibly depressing to work in politics. And you know, politics is this like ugly word, right? But I think we're so fortunate to live in Utah where politics are so accessible, and that we don't even have to use that word. Advocacy is so accessible, and that we have the ability all the time to make a difference, that one single person can make a difference. I mean, it's amazing what each and every one of you are doing. Every person can make a difference, and any person can make a difference, and it doesn't matter what your experience is going into it. 5 people can decide an election, as we've seen in history in Utah. 5 minutes can make a difference. It doesn't have to be 600 hours, right? I love what you said about pushing back on apathy. And I think that is the biggest hurdle that we face in Utah and across the nation, is that largely most of us agree on most issues. And that most of us is generally the people who are not speaking up. And so the more that we can encourage the people around us just to start a conversation, to start where they're at, and even to give ourselves permission to start with one of the issues we care about. Because I hear people all the time saying, I feel so guilty, I care about 8 issues, I can't focus on one, I'm overwhelmed, I'm doing nothing. Give yourself permission to pick one, you know, and try it out for a while, and try some things on it, and say, I'll get back to these others. It's not that my heart doesn't care about so many things. You all can make such a big difference. And so I really just want to thank you all for being here today and being open-minded to how advocacy does take so many different shapes and forms and faces. And appreciate the panel for being here, and Courtney for speaking from the heart in a way that touched all of us. Thank you so much. And before I leave, I just want to let you know that there are more Action Utah events coming up, including tomorrow at interim session. We'll be there at lunchtime, as we are every month, for a lunchtime tour and talk to teach people interim 101. What is this thing? How can we participate in it? What does it look like? Why are the legislators up at the Capitol? That's tomorrow at noon. And coming up after that, we're doing a Civil Talk series with the Hinckley Institute. We'll be talking about communications, communicating with our elected officials on November 4th. We are coming up on our 3rd birthday party. I can't even believe that. But we invite you to celebrate with us on November 7th. And we're really looking forward to training people on how to become delegates. We'll have representatives from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party talking about how to engage with your party and make some decisions in your party. And that's such a great and kind of easy way to get involved. And then lastly, it's the last interim session of the year in mid-November on the 20th, and we'll do our final tour and talk, focusing specifically on suicide prevention and what policies are coming up for that. So you can find all our events at actionutah.org. Okay, thanks so much.